to that other breaking story from the Judiciary Committee yesterday. The accusations that the FBI spied on sitting Republican senators as part of the January 6th investigation. What do we know? Well, we turn to Mark Meredith. He is live from the White House with more. Hi, Mark. Good morning.
Dana, I sure am. Good morning to you. Today, Republican senators are outraged, if not downright furious with the FBI after they learned that some of their calls were also probed as part of the investigation into January 6th, where senators were basically finding out where these people were calling and where they were calling from. These reports are just coming out yesterday, and we're learning who was targeted in the probe, and they include Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, Josh Hawley of Missouri, Tommy Tuberville of Alabama, and Representative Mike Kelly of Pennsylvania. A document recently uncovered by the Trump administration and first reported by Fox Digital shows the FBI pulled the phone records of those lawmakers a few years after the January 6th attack. As Politico points out, the probe did not obtain the content of the calls, only the recipients, the lengths of the calls, and the date on which they were placed. The request for this information was approved by a grand jury. This was all tied to the FBI and Special Counsel Jack Smith's investigation into the alleged efforts to overturn the 2020 election. President Trump was charged but not convicted in the case. The case's code name was Arctic Frost. Lawmakers, as Aisha mentioned, will have a lot of questions about this, about why this was allowed to happen, and are also considering next steps to hold the FBI accountable.
I don't know how Grassley wants to handle it. I'm not going to get ahead of
government administration.
But I tell you, this is a serious situation. We're going to have to get to the bottom.
We've yet to hear from the former special counsel about all of this. We'll be curious if he gives any comment at any point. But we are hearing from President Trump today. Dana, he says it looks like Jack Smith had his hand in the cookie jar. Dana.
All right, Mark, thank you so much.
Let's bring in our colleague, Will Cain, host of the Will Cain Show, 4 o'clock Eastern every day out of Texas. And Will, good morning to you. So Josh Hawley is one of the senators on this list. We're going to talk to him next hour. But here is Ron Johnson's characterization of what was happening there. Watch here.
It should shock, it should outrage every American. Quite honestly, by now, it should be obvious to every American that it's not the Republicans that are a threat to our democracy. It's President Obama, it's President Biden, it's the radical leftists that have served and support them. This is outrageous.
In the end, the president winning re-election forced the case just to be dropped. And it was left there after his victory. What do you think of it, Will? What do you think it goes?
Bill, I think if they did this to a Republican senator, a dozen Republican senators, imagine what they did to the average American. That's not simply a talking point. Think about this. No matter how you feel about any one of these individual Republican senators, this represents roughly 20% of the Republican Senate. These are elected officials. This is votes by people in their state to send a representative to the United States Senate, and they are placed under investigation. And I think that's an attack not just on the Republican Party, but an attack on the American people. You know, we've learned the power of projection, Bill and Dana, and I think we've learned it very profoundly over the past decade. That when you accuse someone else of a certain sin, it is almost biblical that you are the one committing that sin. And for over a decade now, we've heard warnings of authoritarianism, of tyranny. And if this doesn't fit the definition, I don't know what does. Taking your political opposition, taking half of America, because I do believe this is an attack on Americans, and placing them under investigation is the definition of an authoritarian government.
You know, last week or a week and a half ago, James Comey was indicted by a grand jury. This apparently was also approved by a grand jury. Do you think that the Justice Department will release the underlying documents that explain why it even went to the grand jury in the first place?
Wouldn't it be fascinating to know? Yes, I hope so, Dana. Why would a dozen Republican senators be under investigation? Why would you be monitoring their calls, the length of their calls, who they were placing those calls to? What did they have to do with January 6th? Did these Republican senators show me the documentation? Did they, in your investigation, somehow organize, perpetuate, instigate, stoke what they called a threat to democracy, what ended up being a riot on January 6th? Because I think this fits the bill as a threat to democracy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yesterday on your program, and we're 4 weeks from an election in places like New Jersey and Virginia, you had the Winsome Sears on, who wants to be governor there. But on the Democratic side, you had the story break over the weekend. Jay Jones, who wants to be the Attorney General, 3 years ago, exchanged text messages with a Republican in the state legislature there in the Commonwealth. And this was nasty stuff, talking about putting bullets in one of the Republican Speaker of the House. You asked her about it. Let's go ahead and play her soundbite. Here's what she said.
He's doubling down because no sooner than he sent that out, the so-called apology, he was right back to, well, Trump this, Trump that. As we would say in the Marine Corps, is not fit for office. He is not fit to move to the next rank. We don't need anyone who needs on-the-job training. And Jay Jones, with his murderous comments, we can't have him. He can never be Attorney General.
Some of the things that strikes me is that man has 2 young kids, and they talked about putting a bullet, talked about killing the children. Now, several Democrats in Virginia have condemned it, but no one said to drop out. Now, you got 28 days here, okay? If Will Cain was talking this way in a chat room on Facebook, you'd have the cops knocking on your door.
Right.
And they'd have questions for you.
Right.
And like, what was your intent? What's in your mind? What's going on here? And in this case, I mean, it's possible he could be the Attorney General of the Commonwealth.
And Bill, I don't know that my employers would be real thrilled with the fact that I was talking that way over social media. And we, the people, or the people of Virginia, are the employers of, or potential employers of, Jay Jones. So let me ask these employers, the people of Virginia, you don't have to expect everyone to agree with you. And I had this conversation after the assassination of Charlie Kirk. I don't expect everyone in my life to agree with my politics, but I do have a right to expect basic human decency. And although Jay Jones sent these texts before the current climate, before the murder of Charlie Kirk, before attacks on ICE agents, all these other Democrats today live in and recognize that climate, Bill. And I have to ask all of those Democrats who are not walking away from Jay Jones, you don't expect basic human decency of someone who would be employed by the state of Virginia? Again, it's not about his policy or his politics, but the voters of Virginia have to ask, in this world, we know the world we live in today. We watched what happened to Charlie. In this world, isn't it a basic standard that you could expect human decency and not fantasize about the murder of your opponents?
All right, Will Cain, thank you so much for being on our show this morning. We'll see you at 4 o'clock, right before the 5.
I'm not sure he survives.
All right.
We'll see. Thank you, Will. See you at 4 o'clock.
All of this on the heels of yesterday's huge news that we brought you here first on the Will Cain Show. And that is Joe Biden's FBI spying on Republican lawmakers and organizations as part of its investigation entitled Arctic Frost. It was a shocking revelation, an actual threat to democracy, and something that led one senator to ask, why are we even talking about anything else?
I don't understand why we don't have a separate hearing. I find this breathtaking.
Yeah. It's just been 24 hours since the FBI investigated on it. Please give me an opportunity to sort through all this.
Fair enough. I just don't want to wait 24 years to get an answer.
Yeah.
While we wait for that, FBI Director Kash Patel isn't waiting to take action. The agency already firing agents and dismantling its corruption squad. Patel announcing in the move with a statement saying, we are cleaning up a diseased temple 3 decades in the making, identifying the rot, removing those who weaponized law enforcement for political purposes, and those who do not meet standards of this mission while restoring integrity to the FBI. I promised reform, and I intend to deliver it. Let's take a step back and then zoom in on who was targeted by this investigation over at the wall. As you've probably heard by now, 9 Republicans were targeted by the Arctic Frost investigation. Those Republicans include Senator Josh Hawley, Senator Tommy Tuberville, and Senator Bill Hagerty of Tennessee. Now, it wasn't just senators and elected representatives that were targeted by Arctic Frost, by this government, by the Biden administration. And it raises a question that was asked today. No longer are we wondering what if, now we're wondering what now?
Here you have an administration that is activating the FBI against its political opponents and tapping the phones of United States senators. Can I just say that again for my colleagues, for the benefit of my colleagues on the other side of the dais? Tapping the phones of United States senators. This isn't hypothetical. This isn't maybe what will you do in the future. This isn't, oh, gee, can you imagine a situation? This happened. This happened. And this happened, the targeting of Catholics in this country because Joe Biden and his FBI didn't like Catholics who went to a certain kind of mass. I mean, good God in heaven. What is happening to this country?
What is happening is the targeting of Americans. You see, it's not just senators. Those senators are elected representatives of the American people. And by spying on the elected representatives of the American people, you are now investigating, intruding upon the civil liberties of Americans. I have further evidence, because it wasn't just these senators. Several conservative organizations had their records subpoenaed as part of the FBI's probe. Organizations like Trump Make America Great Again Committee, Save America Joint Fundraising Committee, Donald J. Trump for President, Inc. And take a look over here. Turning Point USA or Turning Point Action. All of these organizations also targeted for investigation. That's not to mention the long list of Republicans arrested under the Biden administration, which makes it look like Democrats are the ones targeting and weaponizing with the DOJ their political opponents, which makes it pretty clear Democrats represent the threat to democracy. But it's important to note here, as Senator Hawley did today, all of this, of course, is about you, not President Trump.
This is what was happening under Joe Biden. United States senators spied upon. Former presidents, the political opponents of the president at the time, targeted, prosecuted. Pro-lifers, targeted, prosecuted. Catholics, targeted, prosecuted. 92 conservative organizations put under surveillance, targeted for potential prosecution. Gee, I don't know. Would you call that an example of weaponization?
Senator Hawley, that is the ultimate weaponization, and weaponization under Donald Trump has ended.
Senator Chuck Grassley, who sounded the alarm on all of this, wrote on X, Biden FBI weaponization equals worse than Watergate. Which got us thinking, where and when have we seen the weaponization of power in history? Well, in the United States, we've seen several examples throughout our history. From Watergate, there was also the anti-communist McCarthyism hunts of the early 1950s. How about Operation Chaos, which was a CIA and FBI surveillance program looking into anti-war activists? And these are just what's happened here at home. But if you expand the lens out globally, you'll see many more examples of power in governments spying on, investigating, and using their power to go after citizens. Most notable example everyone points to is East Germany, where the government literally turned neighbor on neighbor, looking for those to turn in your fellow citizen. In Russia, there's the repression of political opponents. In China, of course, there's famous surveillance of not just overseas dissidents, but anybody there at home. And there's raids, Operation Tuntun, and so forth, to intimidate the opposition in countries like Venezuela. Now, my next guest is one of the 8 Republican senators targeted in this operation. Alabama
Attorney General Pam Bondi on the Hill today, battling Democrats over who's really weaponizing the government. This as the FBI revealed former special counsel Jack Smith tracked the private phone records of nearly a dozen Republican senators. That's almost 12, Dana, during the January 6th probe, which sure sounds worse than Watergate.
The conduct's arguably is worse than Watergate.
Why did they ask to know who I called and what I was doing from January 4th to the 7th? Can you tell me that?
No, Senator, and there were 8 senators in total. How
About
dare you? I'm a career prosecutor.
Mr.
Don't you
Ballard,
ever challenge my integrity. I wish that you loved your state of California as much as you hate President Trump. We'd be in really good shape then.
When will it be that the members of this committee on a bipartisan basis demand answers to those questions and refuse to accept
Clearly you're
personal,
a failed lawyer
refuse
because
to accept,
you don't understand when someone can and cannot answer a question.
All right, Mr. Morrow, you are the lawyer here. Can you tell us what is this story in a fair world bigger than Watergate, or where do you see this going?
Let's see where it goes. So I would say a couple of things. First of all, anything like this has to be opened with what's called a predication document, all right?
All right, you already lost me.
So for the FBI to do this, you need a document, and it has to spell out the contours of the case. And that then has to be lawyered, right? It goes over, the lawyers have to approve it. Something like this at this level goes all the way up the chain. This went all the way. What's interesting is it almost certainly did not go all the way up the chain to the president, all right? Because you would have just bumped into an auto pen. So this is another aspect of that. But that said, My point is this. Get that document. That document is going to demonstrate what they say they had in order to open up a case, because you don't just start investigating. You got to open a case, especially at this level. To open up a case, to get this lawyered and approved, what was the justification to open on 8 senators and a congressman? Lastly, real quick, understand what they were doing here. When you do something like this, you're just getting contact, right? You're just getting who called who. Okay, that's not as invasive as a wiretap. But the reason you do this is to build to a wiretap. You go from the bottom and you build up. What they're looking for with this is, look at this. This senator talked to this known bad guy. You go to a judge, you say, Your Honor, we got this connection. Now we got to bump it up. We need a wiretap order. That's what they would have been looking for. My question, because it does feel to me like we're still at the beginning of this thing, because there's all these revelations, is, did they do that? Are we going to find out that they were up on 8 and 9 congressional phones? Right. And that'll be a real explosion. So let's see where it goes.
Oh, I'm worried about my 3 a.m. calls to Lindsey Graham. Jesse, this seems like another case of projection. If you want to know what the Dems were up to, look at what they're accusing you of. The weaponizing, weaponizing.
I mean, they went crazy. I mean, that's not just senators. They went after parents, Catholics, the Trump campaign, Charlie Kirk. And then they indicted the entire inner circle of Donald Trump. The Democrat reaction to January 6th was worse than January 6th. We only know this from a whistleblower.
Yeah.
Ray buried this inside some secret vault somewhere. A whistleblower had to come bring this to our attention. Imagine what else we're about to find out. So they cracked into these phones. That means you know where the senator was exactly, who was calling him, who he called, how long the phone conversation was. And that's an incredibly abusive overreach. And what they're probably trying to do is cast this wide net to create some grand criminal conspiracy and indict the entire Republican Party. And they used a guy that prosecuted war crimes in The Hague to do it. This guy should be in prison. And what they need to do is either appoint a special counsel or have some sort of Senate Select Committee to go up, do hearings, put Ray, put Garland, put Smith under oath, and if they lie, you throw them in prison. I'm also concerned about blackmail. This happens a lot in Washington, so you get all this info from a senator's phone, maybe you don't use it. Maybe you see he called a mistress, maybe it was a doctor, maybe it was a foreign national, and then you hold that over his head and you get him to do favors for the feds. You got to look into everything.
That is such a good point. I believe it was called the Arctic Frost investigation.
Yes,
my favorite flavor of Gatorade Zero is Arctic Frost. You can look it up. It's there. What did you make? What do you make of this? Is it one of those things that we think is a big deal, but nobody else cares because it's too complicated?
Well, both things can be true in that regard. I do think that we'll see the document. I do wonder if they ever figured out a way to go even further to that next step to figure out then what was being said on the phone calls. Remember, if you go back, the Democrats hired television producers in order to really make a big show of the January 6th hearings. And I think that they realized they didn't have enough to make the sale and to be persuasive to the American people for what they were trying to achieve. So it seems to me that there was this overreach by the Biden team, and it was a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit over here. And so then if you use the thread, you pull them all together, and then you pull on that thread, you find out, oh, wow, they were actually tracking senators' phone calls.
It's because there was no boss. I'm telling you, there was nobody running the show to say stop. They were all running around doing what they want to do.
Jessica, that's a good point. Maybe this overreach resulted from the ultimate decision to have a phony, fake imposter for a president.
No, I don't think so. And no one has accused Merrick Garland of being phony or fake, and he was the one who was actually in charge of Jack Smith, not Joe Biden. I'm stunned that Republicans actually want to draw attention to this, because now we're rehashing the fact that the senators who were part of this investigation are not just random names that he picked off a list, but people who were either talking to Donald Trump or co-conspirators that are named in Jack Smith's charging documents for trying to turn over a free and fair election.
Wait, Lindsey Graham was a co-conspirator?
That's actually Well, Lindsey Graham, it's funny that he was so aggressive at this. Why would they want to know who I called? Because he called Brad Raffensperger after Donald Trump, you remember, asked him, well, why can't you find me 11,587 votes or whatever? And Lindsey Graham also called him. And according to Raffensperger, he said that he thought that Lindsey Graham was interested in talking to him about the mail-in ballots and maybe if they would be invalidated. Lindsey Graham has said he was just doing that as his role as senator. It had nothing to do with the fact that he was trying to overturn the election. That is not what a lot of people think about it. So Lindsey Graham sitting there being enraged is hilarious. I'm so glad that you said that this is a metadata issue versus wiretapping, because Josh Hawley is up there holding up a billboard that refutes exactly what he's saying. He's like, you wiretap me. It's like, no, actually, we just know what's on the call logs.
Attorney General Pam Bondi on Capitol Hill today as 9 GOP senators learned that former special counsel Jack Smith was tracking their phone calls as part of his January 6th investigation. Back then, Smith charged President Trump with 4 counts, including conspiracy and obstruction. He dropped the case after the Supreme Court ruled on presidential immunity, and the president won the election in 2024. Now, Fox News Digital reports that Smith had info on who the 9 Republican lawmakers were calling, when and where the calls were made, but not the content of those conversations. Senate Judiciary Chair Chuck Grassley calling it, quote, arguably worse than Watergate. Here he is.
This is an outrage, an unconstitutional breach, and ought to be immediately addressed by you and Director Patel.
The whole of government was weaponized against President Trump, and not just President Trump, people who were Republicans because of their party affiliation.
Those who did this wrong, this illegal activity, absolutely, they need to be prosecuted and they need to face the full extent of accountability within the law.
Tennessee Republican Senator Marsha Blackburn, one of the lawmakers whose phones was tracked. She is also running for governor of Tennessee, and she joins us now. Senator, good to have you here. You know, I'd like to play this from Ali Honig this morning on CNN, talking about his reaction to what Jack Smith did in the investigation. Watch.
That was an extremely aggressive, probably overly aggressive move by Jack Smith. And ultimately, he may have to answer questions. Why did you think it was appropriate and necessary to subpoena the records of sitting U.S. members of Congress? That's a very dramatic move.
So will Jack Smith have to answer questions, and in what environment?
Yes, Martha, and indeed, you've got DOJ conducting further investigations. So is the FBI. What we do not know is why. What was the predicate for this? Why were the 8 of us targeted on this? And we do know, as you said, that they pulled all phone calls coming in and out, where we were physically when we received those, and the length of time of the phone call. We do know that after President Trump was indicted in August of 23, that is when they started pulling all of our phone records. And Jack Smith does have to answer some questions. There's more information to come to us. Much of it is tied up in grand jury documents. We know that that will be released to the FBI at some point soon, but we do know it's illegal. We do know it's a violation of our rights. And of course, Jack Smith is going to have to answer for this. I'm already working on a letter to the D.C. bar, a complaint letter to file against him. He should be disbarred.
Well, let me ask you this, Senator. Were you ever approached? Did anyone ever say to you, can we please see your phone records from the dates around January the 6th? And would you have complied if you were asked for that from the investigation?
No one ever approached me. And Martha, this is on top of the surveillance that took place in 2016. I was vice chair of President Trump's transition. We found out, as you remember, that as a part of Crossfire Hurricane, they were surveilling different components of the transition. No one ever gave me an answer as to whether or not I was being surveilled then. So then you have this. The commonality between the 8 of us is that we're all Republicans, we all support President Trump, and we all had valid questions about what transpired in the 2020 election.
Senator Marsha Blackburn, thank you very much.
Alabama Senator and gubernatorial candidate Tommy Tuberville joins us now. Senator, thanks for being with us. Quite the news yesterday. You had your phones, had your communication surveilled by the DOJ, by the FBI under Joe Biden. What does that make you think?
And orders by Jack Smith, who was after President Trump, has been after him for the last 2 or 3 years. Will, it was all because of whistleblowers. We would have never known this, but whistleblowers are starting to come out of the woodwork now, talking about different agencies. Thank goodness for these whistleblowers. As you said, these FBI agents were fired today. But it's absolutely amazing. It's all started back during the Obama years when Lois Lerner of the IRS was weaponized to go after these LLCs from conservative groups. Ever since then, if you go back and look at it, there's been a pattern of people being attacked on the Republican side. It's wrong. It needs to quit happening, and people need to be fired over it, not just these FBI agents, but let's go after Jack Smith. Let's go after the people that pulled the trigger to go after a sitting president of the United States, Donald Trump.
Senator, I also want to ask you about another scandal that's somewhat flying under the radar as we talk about this weaponization of the FBI, and that's what happened during the 2020 census. Some are pointing out, as Senator Jim Banks has pointed out, that the 2020 census was a fraud. The Biden admin used a shady privacy formula that scrambled the data and miscounted 14 states. It included illegal immigrants and handed Democrats extra seats. Americans deserve a fair count, and I'm fighting to fix it. So, Senator, on this census from 2020, you saw a lot of states, Republican states, come out with lower citizen counts and thus lower representation in Congress than they should have gotten. Arkansas, less than down 5% from actuality. Florida, down 3.48%. Illinois, Texas, all deficits as to the actual count. And here are the states that, by the way, were higher, according to the census. Delaware, Hawaii, Massachusetts, Minnesota, New York, Rhode Island, all the census counting higher than the actual population. What do you know about the 2020 U.S. Census?
Well, it's all game plan, Will. The Democrats were letting illegals come in for a different count. They obviously had a census going that was all rigged. The 2020 election basically was rigged. And you just go back, look at all the numbers. Look at the job numbers that the Biden administration pushed out there. We put 400,000 or 500,000 more people in the last quarter into jobs, which was totally wrong. They lie about everything. They stretch everything. If we don't get this corrected, this country is not going to make it. It's going to be torn apart. But it's all about numbers when it comes to the census, and President Trump said he's going to redo the census, which, God help us, there's no telling what it'll end up being.
That is definitely something that needs to be done. You can't have an inaccurate count of the number of people in this country for illegal immigration purposes, but also it obviously affects the way that we vote, the way we get representatives and senators in this country. Senator Tuberville, thanks so much for being with us here today.
Thank you, Will.
Complete breakdown of leadership and weaponization of government per Senator Josh Hawley and AG Pam Bondi, and taking a look at what, in particular, the former Attorney General under Joe Biden, Jack Smith, has done or did with the power that he had. Look, one of those senators is available to us right now. We're going to talk with her. Senator Joni Ernst of the great state of Iowa, member of the Armed Services Committee, chair of the Small Business Committee. Great to see you today. This has been so much more, I think, than maybe even the American public knew about. I mean, there's so many gaps between what was going on and what we think we know. Can you speak to the headline today?
Absolutely, Harris. Thank you so much. And it truly proves to the American people there is a deep state that exists within our federal government. And I will remind every one of your viewers, Harris, that every time President Donald Trump moves a muscle, you will hear the wailing of the Democrats, the gnashing of their teeth, and the wringing of their hands about how he is a threat to democracy. And yet here we have concrete evidence and proof that it was President Joe Biden and his deep state operatives that went after Republicans, anyone in opposition. It was Joe Biden. Chew on that a little bit, Democrats. There is not a word that I have heard yet coming out of that judiciary hearing from the members of the Democratic Party that are pushing back on what was done in this former administration to President Donald Trump as a private citizen and as the members of this distinguished body, the United States Senate. This has got to end, Harris. We do need to get to the bottom of this. But again, this is the Democratic deep state. This is not a Republican threat to democracy. It is the Democrats that are threatening our democracy by going after elected officials and ordinary American citizens.
Look, the part that really, I mean, the Attorney General Pam Bondi sat patiently because what Senator Hawley was doing was laying out the case against Democrats. And at one point he said, I want to know who authorized Catholic spying. I want to know who authorized that memo that you go after people of faith. I want to know who intimidated pro-life American citizens. I mean, this isn't just bad news for the Democratic Party. It's something that deserves a criminal investigation if people were targeted in this way.
Oh, most definitely, Harris. And yes, Senator Hawley laid it out beautifully. The abuses of the system. This is when you truly do weaponize the Department of Justice. This was done under President Joe Biden. And again, he laid it out beautifully. All of the different groups that have been targeted under the Democrats through many, many years. And now is our opportunity to show the American people what has truly been going on. Thank heavens we do have whistleblowers that are still making sure all of this comes to light. Now we can dig in. But I guarantee you, Harris, this is just probably scratching the surface. This is what we know today. I even wonder what more will come out as the Judiciary Committee and other committees follow this trail of whistleblower complaints. But there is more out there. I'm most certain of that, Harris, and I hope we can continue to discuss this and flesh this out with the American people.
Look, from reports, Senator Josh Hawley was one of those targeted.
Yes.
And so when he started calling for all the further hearings and what needs to come forth with receipts, as you just have said, more needs to come. I believe, as a journalist, that there will be so many more questions to ask and be answered because he's not going to give up on that. And I would imagine none of you will, whether you sit in that committee or not, whether you were one of the ones targeted. I mean, it's basically because of what you believe. In America, you serve us as elected officials, but you're American citizens too.
Yes, absolutely. And this is why we really do have to do our jobs and make sure that we are pulling every last thread to this to understand who was it that authorized this. I think that's incredibly important. And to those that were actually executing those wiretaps and digging into the personal information of these elected officials, how did they justify that in their own minds? How did they think that this was constitutional? I have no idea. So not only the leadership and those in authority that gave those orders, but on down that chain of command within the Department of Justice, why did they think this was okay? What reasoning did they go through as they are executing those orders on, again, elected officials representing their home states, those that are in opposition to the party in power, and again, to those ordinary citizens, just moms and dads going to school board meetings? How did they justify that?
Senator Joni Ernst with a very important question today. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it. We're going to go back to the hearing now. Good to see you.
And back to Washington, where work to end the shutdown continues, and Senate Republican Conference Chair Tom Cotton joins us. President Trump, truth last night. Democrats have shut down the United States government right in the midst of one of the most successful economies. I am happy to work with Democrats on their failed health care policies or anything else, but first they must allow our government to reopen. In fact, they should open our government tonight. Do you see anything, and perhaps this situation with the airports could be something that helps break the logjam so that the two parties can get together, talk, get this done?
Well, Dana, the real world consequences are going to start piling up here, and hopefully that'll help the Democrats come to their senses. As President Trump said, as Speaker Johnson and Senator Thune have said all along, there's nothing to negotiate until the Democrats vote to open the government. If they want to talk about giving taxpayer-funded health care to illegal aliens at that point, then they're certainly welcome to do so. But they need to open the government. You started to see some consequences yesterday with these air traffic delays out in California. Later this week, the Women, Infants, and Children's Nutritional Program is probably going to run out of money. That means poor moms with kids may not be able to buy milk and eggs and breads for their kids. We're going to have delays for civilian employees' paychecks later this week, then troop paychecks next week. These are all because the Democrats refuse to open the government, and then they can negotiate about health care, immigration, or anything else. And frankly, Dana, what we started hearing around the Senate yesterday is that there's a big left-wing rally in Washington, D.C. next Saturday, October 18th. And Chuck Schumer and the Democrats are so scared of their own radical left-wing base, they plan to keep the government shut until after that rally, and only then will they vote to keep the government open. They shouldn't be playing political games with nutrition for kids and our troops' pay. They should vote to open the government today.
Okay, so it's interesting about what you're saying about the protest, because there is a theme out there about Senator Schumer. And one of the reasons he has, held steady on this one, where he didn't in March, is because he's concerned that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or someone else from his left would be challenging him before next year. Do you think there's any semblance of truth to that?
100% true, Dana. We've seen it now for months in the Senate. Chuck Schumer is scared, first, of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and second, of his radical left-wing base. That's why we're in this Schumer shutdown. Chuck Schumer knows better. For the 4 years he ran the Senate, he put 13 bills just like this one on the floor, short-term funding bills, to allow the parties to continue to negotiate. He voted for all 13 of them, of course. Now he refuses to vote for them because he's scared of his own political base. And particularly, he's scared of this big left-wing protest in Washington, D.C. coming next Saturday, October 18th, and apparently is willing to shut down nutritional programs for young children and pay for our troops so he can get beyond that protest on October 18th and not face any blowback. It's outrageous political gamesmanship.
All right. In the meantime, we've had the situation where the president yesterday said that, well, he was asked a question, a hypothetical, if he would ever consider using the Insurrection Act. He said, hypothetically, yes, sure, I would do that. Senator Merkley is out there saying that Trump is manufacturing this crisis in Portland. Where do you come down on National Guard troops being deployed to deal with this issue, and is the Insurrection Act necessary?
Well, I don't think any American who's seen the history of attacks on federal authority and federal property in Portland going back at least 5 years would say it's manufactured. Look, you always want to rely on local police first, and the police forces in these cities can probably do the job if they're allowed to do the job. Unfortunately, you have left-wing Democratic mayors who don't just restrain them from enforcing ordinary criminal laws. You have the mayor of Chicago who is telling his police department explicitly that he's not allowed to support federal immigration officers in their city. So think about that. You could have a shootout between depraved, criminal, illegal aliens and federal immigration enforcement authorities, and the Chicago Police Department are not going to come to their assistance. So if this continues and you have an open defiance and resistance of federal law, then of course the president has to at least consider the use of the National Guard and, if necessary, invoking the Insurrection Act, as has happened from time to time throughout our history, because we cannot have Democratic-run cities openly resisting federal authority inside of their cities.
Well, let's hope it doesn't come to that. Keep us posted. Interesting on that protest on October 18th. I bet you're right. They'll wait until after that. And we'll see if Mamdani goes down and has a starring role. Thank you. I want to get you back to this hearing. Senate Judiciary, that's Lindsey Graham, the senator from South Carolina, and the Attorney General, Pam Bondi. They're talking about Crossfire Hurricane.
You wonder why we're looking at Comey? Give me a break. Why are we looking at Comey? Because he ran an FBI and personally knew about exculpatory information and let it slide. How in the hell can two FBI agents interview a man who says the document you're using against a sitting president to suggest he may be a Russian agent or Carter Page that is now no longer reliable? How does that not get to the court? Can you tell me how that doesn't get to the court? You can't, can you?
I can't, Senator, and I
Can
can't
you tell me
discuss it.
why my phone records, when I'm the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, were sought by the Jack Smith agents? Why did they ask to know who I called and what I was doing from January 4th to the 7th? Can you tell me that?
No, Senator, and there were 8 senators in total.
Do you think that was an abuse of power?
Senator, I cannot discuss whether there is or is not an ongoing investigation. If I may add one thing, they also wasted $50 million on what you just described, trying to put President Trump in jail prior to the election.
Before Senator Whitehouse, I want to introduce into the record what is called the Durham Annex. The annex is a declassified appendix to John Durham's report about Crossfire Hurricane. The Durham Annex contains information exposing a reported Clinton campaign plan to falsify and tie President Trump to Russia. For years, I've fought to assemble and publicize all the facts surrounding Durham investigation, Crossfire Hurricane, and related matters. The Durham Annex was declassified as a large part because of Attorney General Bondi.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah,
may I ask you a question?
if I can answer it, yes. Go
Thank you,
ahead.
Mr. Chairman. Are you going to hold a separate hearing on your whistleblower account of the FBI investigation of 8 United States senators?
I think we need, my answer to your question is, I think we need to wait until we see what the FBI can report and whether it's necessary to have a hearing. Right now, I haven't ruled one out, but I haven't made a decision.
And what year do you think that will happen in?
I want the FBI to be a thorough investigation of it and report to us what information they can give us, and I don't know how long that'll take them.
With respect, are you giving them a certain period of time?
I have not given them a certain period of time. I'll discuss that matter with my staff and see if that needs to be done.
Okay, if civil suits are filed against the perpetrators at the FBI, will that facilitate your investigation?
Well, what's the question again?
If the 8 senators who were spied upon sue the hell out of the Department of Justice and the perpetrators involved, will that facilitate their investigation and or yours? I guess what I'm getting to is I don't understand why we don't have a separate hearing. I find this breathtaking.
Yeah. It's just been 24 hours since the FBI investigated on it. Please give me an opportunity to sort through all this.
Fair enough. I just don't want to wait 24 years to get an answer.
Yeah. We do have an active investigation going on
Okay,
through
so the Senate Judiciary Committee continues. So what they were just talking about is this story that broke last night that I believe it was a total of 8 senators and 1 congressman were targeted by the Justice Department and their phone calls were tracked. This was approved by a grand jury, but we don't know the underlying features. And Senator Kennedy was just asking Senator Grassley, Are we going to have a hearing? When is that going to be? And he wants a separate one away from this one. Grassley is considering that at this time.
So all these lawmakers are Republicans, 8 senators, 1 member of the House, and one of the senators with us now. Josh Hawley, Republican from Missouri, Senate Judiciary Committee member, just stepped out of that hearing. What did you hear from Dan Bongino and the FBI last night on this?
Well, what I know, Bill, is that they targeted the DOJ, the Biden DOJ specifically targeted a group of us. They asked for our call records so they could see who we talked to, who called us. I believe also track our location over a period of days. This is outrageous. I mean, this is really unbelievable. It's blatantly unconstitutional. It's a violation of the First Amendment. It's a violation of the separation of powers. And it also goes to show you the extent to which the Biden administration was so corrupt, using the FBI to target their political enemies. And let's not forget, they didn't just do it to senators. They did it to school board parents who went and spoke up at those school board meetings. They did it to 92 conservative organizations, including Charlie Kirk's Turning Point USA. They tried to recruit spies into Catholic parishes. That's the kind of people we're dealing with here. Bill, we need a total investigation, a thorough investigation into everybody who was responsible, and I think there needs to be prosecutions.
Okay, so here's Kash Patel, FBI director on X. This is his statement. Number 2, guys, we recently uncovered proof that phone records of U.S. lawmakers were seized for political purposes. That abuse of power ends now. Under my leadership, the FBI will deliver truth and accountability and never again be weaponized against the American people. Senator, what were they looking for?
Good question. I mean, who knows? This was done years after the fact, by the way. This was back in 2023 when they go and start this fishing expedition. I tell you what it looks like to me, Bill. It looks like targeting political enemies. You talk about an enemies list. I mean, this would make Richard Nixon blush. I mean, this is unbelievable what Joe Biden did. He targeted the former president of the United States, Donald Trump, when he was a private citizen. He targeted 8 Republican senators. He targeted almost 100 conservative organizations. He targeted parents who go to meetings. He targeted anybody who was in Washington, D.C. on January 6th exercising their First Amendment rights. I mean, I could just go on and on. He targeted pro-lifers who peacefully protested outside abortion clinics. This was the most out-of-control administration, the most corrupt administration when it comes to abuse of the Constitution in our history. And Bill, we've got to have an investigation that turns over the facts of everybody who was involved in this. Who signed off on this stuff? Who knew about it? We need to know.
Jack Smith was running the show there, right?
That's
and
correct.
The reason why the investigation ended is because Donald Trump won the election.
That's correct.
If he loses that election, maybe this investigation continues. Where was it going, do you think? Did they think that there was some January 6th deal that needed to be looked at with a closer eye?
Oh, I think what it was is plainly an attempt to target Donald Trump. I think it all goes back to the fact they wanted to keep Trump off the ballot. Joe Biden, remember, directed the Attorney General at the time, Merrick Garland, to start investigating Trump. And this is what they did. They got a special prosecutor whose sole responsibility, his sole remit, was to go after Trump and anybody associated with Trump, anybody who was standing up to Biden. I think they wanted to keep Trump off the ballot. That failed. Then they wanted to prevent him from winning the election. That failed. They wanted to target anybody who was speaking up against Biden. That failed. But here we are, Bill. I mean, this is an incredible abuse of the FBI, which is the most powerful law enforcement agency in the world. And listen, if it can happen to members of Congress, it can happen to anybody. And we know it did. We know that they targeted ordinary citizens, pro-lifers, these 92 conservative organizations. We've got to make sure this never happens.
Okay, sir. Thank you. I'll let you get back in the hearing. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
stepping out. We'll run this story down when we can.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.